to the Geek Legion of Doom, you furry fools!
In 2025, we got the Russian movie Kraken now. In 2026, we get the Norwegian movie Kraken. These films are not to be confused, they are different movies. Right, so let's talk about the 2026 version. So this, I guess you want to say, broadly follows a similar story to Jaws. We have a Norwegian fjord which is being used by this kind of fish farm to farm salmon, and they're using like kind of sonic device to try and get rid of these kind of parasites that are affecting the salmon. But it's kind of causing the wildlife to act strangely, shall we say. And then we kind of get a couple of people go missing. So this marine biologist is called in, and she discovers initially even larger, these like cat-sized parasites that look a little bit like kind of horseshoe crabs. But that's not the least of their problems, because there may well be, well, you probably guessed by the title, a large kraken that is living in the fjords, and it's being irritated by these kind of sonic devices that the greedy and corrupt business owner kind of won't turn off. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So why do I say it's broadly similar to the movie Jaws? So a few things, you know, like I said, we've got this corrupt official. This time it's this kind of business owner who is using things for his own advantage, ultimately kind of causing problems. We've got a kind of a small team of protagonists trying to kind of fight this kind of creature. We have the creature really unseen until the kind of the final act of the movie. So there's some similarities really to Jaws. A few kind of people go, you know, missing through the film initially. So yeah, it's similar, not exactly the same, but it's a similar kind of plot to Jaws. But let's talk about what I think works in this movie's favour. Okay, so this being filmed in Norway, it does take advantage of this kind of local scenery, these misty sort of hills with the kind of the fog rolling off of these fjords. I mean, it looks like quite breathtaking at times, I have to say, and the camera definitely wants to kind of show off the kind of this Nordic landscape, and I think it looks beautiful, and I do think there's some really great cinematography at times, and use of the kind of the natural environment. We don't get too many scenes underwater, I have to say, but when we do, I think there's some decent underwater photography. I think the cast do a good job. I mean, obviously this is spoken in Norwegian. There's a little bit of English in it, but for the most part it's spoken in Norwegian, and it's always a little harder to tell kind of the acting ability when it's not your own language. But I think from what I can tell, everyone here does a sort of a decent enough job. And the Kraken is treated with this kind of like this mystery, and again, maybe it's taken the kind of the Jaws template, not really sort of showing you much. We kind of get the odd glimpse here and there, sort of early on in the movie, but it's not until the end of the third act really when we really kind of get to see much of it at all, to be brutally honest. But we have this kind of extra element as well with these parasites that give a kind of an extra threat, I suppose, with these kind of bloodthirsty things that attach themselves and are kind of dangerous in their own right. So that gives us kind of extra, an extra kind of peril, I suppose. The VFX, I'm not quite sure what the budget is for this, but it's obviously not a mega budget movie, but I think the VFX, for the most part, look pretty good. I mean, some of the CGI in the Kraken is a little bit hit and miss, but I think they do their best to try and hide that. But the kind of, certainly these parasites look pretty gross, if I'm honest, and as I said, they look like mutant horseshoe crabs, and pretty gross looking, I have to say, and they look pretty decent, it must be said. And I think the movie has this kind of slower pace, admittedly, but it's trying to kind of build the tension here. does a reasonable job, I think, with kind of like getting you to understand the characters' perspectives. I mean, it doesn't have an overblown cast. You know, we've got our marine biologist, this kind of what we presume is like an ex-boyfriend who works at this kind of fish farm. This policewoman, the owner of this fish farm, and a couple of other kind of like smaller characters and stuff. So not a huge cast, but I think it does well to sort of give you an idea about what all the characters are. And for example, this was there a romance between these kind of couple and stuff? But they don't dwell on it, but you get enough there where you can kind of piece things together and stuff. So I think the characterization is pretty good. And when we kind of have the final act of the movie, try to kind of get away from this kind of Kraken and its kind of tentacles and stuff. Pretty exciting stuff, certainly for that final act of the movie, with the added element of these kind of giant parasites as well. And there's a kind of a broad kind of ecological message without kind of beating you over the head with it. So that, there's a lot to enjoy if you want a kind of a monster movie. What doesn't work, I wouldn't say this movie is particularly original. As I say, it does kind of follow at least some themes that was set out by Jaws, as have many other movies, to be fair. But you at least with, I think, the Russian movie that was a kind of a submarine-based film, I think that at least gave it a little bit of a different idea for dealing with this kind of like a creature feature like that. Let's talk about the actual Kraken itself, because I think there's a couple of issues I have with it. Number one is we don't see much of it, and we never really get a real money shot, I think. One of the issues I have with that is I never really got the sense of scale about how big it was, because we never really see... I mean, there's one shot towards the end where we sort of see it underwater. But even then, I wasn't really quite sure of the scale. It doesn't appear anywhere near as big as the Russian version of the movie, like the previous year. Still, obviously, a big creature, but not as big as the Russian Kraken movie. But yeah, it's really hard to see the scale of it, because you never really see it with juxtaposed with something else that you can kind of recognise, and therefore get that sort of sense at scale. I mean, we can tell it's big. We have tentacles coming, like wrecking this kind of these buildings and stuff, and the kind of like this fish farm towards the end of the movie. But again, you can't tell how long these kind of tentacles are compared to the base and stuff like that. So I never really felt you got sense of the scale. Some of the kind of the CGI on the Kraken, there's one or two times where it sort of looks CGI. I mean, again, maybe the budget wasn't massive, but it's notable for looking CGI. Certainly not the worst CGI, but CGI nonetheless. And I got to say as well, and again, I presume this was done to save money and also hide some VFX, is the finale takes place at night. So when we see the Kraken, or more of the Kraken, because we never really get a full look at it, it's quite often in the dark. So it's obscured by both the dark and this kind of fog, which is kind of rolling over the fjords. So again, it gives it a kind of a creepier look, but I think it's clearly to try and hide some of the kind of the VFX. And again, we never really feel like you get a proper look. I have to question as well some of the kind of the way this thing is moving around. It almost appears to like raise its bulk of the body out of the water at one point. And I was thinking, how is it doing that? What's it sort of attaching to and stuff like that? Because it appears to be like in the water, but it sort of raises the sort of the body mass out of the water. And then when we have these sort of tentacles that are sort of following our protagonists around, like inside the building, it's sticking its tentacles like through the doors. And I was like, how is it knowing where to sort of, because it's obviously can't see in there, and they're out of the water, so it's not like it can kind of like taste them through the water or anything like that. But it seems to almost like these tentacles like sniffing. Again, it wasn't really clear about how it was kind of hunting and stuff. It just seemed to be like going after these people inside. And I think, well, how is it? I mean, I guess it would be feeling around. And at one point, it looks like that's what it is doing, but other times it seems to be like directly kind of like pulling like grates off and stuff. Again, to me it just seemed a little bit like, no, I don't know, this seems more B-movie than kind of like the more serious tone that the movie sort of tries to have for the most part. So I have some questions in regards to the kind of the Kraken and how it's depicted. We get the secondary threat of these giant parasites, but they just kind of disappear at the end of the movie, I'm going to say. They're just not there anymore. So that doesn't really, again, that's not really resolved. I mean, they might have been an interesting sort of story in their own right to a degree, but you know, they just, we get a few attacks, but they're just gone. Yeah, so, you know, whatever. A lot, I think, of the movie is a lot of techno-babble. We have our, you know, our marine biologist talking to the kind of the engineers and stuff, talking about a lot of kind of techno-babble about this kind of technology and stuff like that. And that is, honestly, the bulk of the runtime here. You know, the second act of this movie is a lot of that. You know, so it feels like you're spending a lot of time with people talking about the kind of the science of how this device works and all the rest of it, and how this kind of frequency is affecting the kind of the wildlife and all the rest of it. You know, it's not particularly thrilling. There's a couple of like sort of attacks that the Kraken has in the movie, but we never really like see much of it. It's just, you know, people disappearing underwater and you maybe get a glimpse and stuff. But and again, I presume maybe this is a budgetary issue, or maybe it's trying to kind of eke out that suspense. But I think, you know, I understand you might want to kind of like, you don't want to show your creature straight away, but at the same time, I maybe think it's holding it back too much is a little bit frustrating, because it's like, you know, you never ever really properly get a proper good look at it anyway. So I feel maybe you'll feel somewhat shortchanged in this one, unfortunately. You know, so it's a pretty fun movie for a creature feature, and I think there is there's some enjoyment to be had with this one. But I don't think it's a slam dunk by any stretch. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. I think it's probably worth a watch if you're a fan of kind of creature features. But it's a shame of what this movie could have been, I think, more than what it is. The potential of what it could have. But there you go. Have you seen 2026's Kraken? If you've seen 2025, is it something you prefer? I'd be curious. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.
If there's something strange in your code library, who you gonna call? If it's nerdy and it won't compile, Geekbusters!